It's October, and that means that things are winding down here in my 5B garden just northwest of Chicago. But that doesn't mean that we don't still have some work to do before the cold hits. Fall garden duties aren't just to clean up the mess from a bountiful growing season. It's also a great way to get a jump start on next year. Today, we'll talk about 5 things you can do to set up next year's garden for success. I find that seed saving is a great first step in October garden cleanup. That way, I can save the seeds, set them aside, then clear the brush without worrying about spreading seeds into an area of a garden where I don't want them to grow. When cleaning up this garden bed in particular, I need to be mindful of the plethora of seeds that I can save, from black-eyed Susans to daisies to coneflowers to my beautiful cardinal flowers that the hummingbirds love. Now, all the flowers that I just mentioned, they do fine self-seeding on their own. So if you just want them to fall where they are and continue to grow, then that's fine. For me, my black-eyed Susans are getting a little bit unruly. They've actually taken over the front border, and frankly, they're a little too tall to be a border flower for me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to save some of the seeds. I'm going to clear the rest. I'm going to transplant the black-eyed Susans that are already in the ground here and move them to somewhere where they don't crowd out the rest of my flowers. To save certain types of flower seeds, like these black-eyed Susans, it's as easy as just grabbing the flower head, lopping it off. Pop that into a paper bag, shake it up, and you'll have your seeds. Some seeds are really tiny, like the ones on this cardinal flower. So what I'll do then is I'll typically just take my hand, run it along the flower, and let the seeds fall where they may. I want my cardinal flowers to stay in this spot, which is why I'm okay with doing this. Now, purple coneflower seeds can be a little bit tougher to get to because of the spikes on the outside. All you have to do is find a steady surface, flip over the spike, and pound it down, and all the seeds come out. This concoleus next to me, and the others like it in my garden, are all 5th generation plants that came from cuttings that I made over the years. Every fall, when the low temperatures consistently start to dip below 50, I make sure to take some healthy cuttings from my coleus, put them in some soil, and bring them indoors. That way I can grow them as a house plant during the cold season, and then bring them back out after the threat of frost is over, and continue to grow them all the way through next growing season. Make a diagonal cut about 6 inches down the stem just below a leaf node. Before potting, remove all but the top few leaves so you can mostly bury the stem. If you want to dip the stem in rooting powder, now's the time. I don't, but you can. Roots will emerge from the leaf nodes that are in the soil. Once potted, water from the bottom and keep them in indirect light. The cutting method works with annuals, tender perennials, herbs, and more. So take some cuttings this October and grow through the entire cold season. Another thing you'll want to take care of in October is deciding whether it's time to divide or transplant any of your perennials. These Siberian irises have absolutely thrived since I divided them a couple of years ago. They continue to flower well, but just looking at them, it's apparent they could afford to be broken up a bit. The telltale sign for when irises are ready to be divided is if there's a ring in the center. If there's a ring, they're ready to be divided. To divide, start by cutting back the foliage to around 1/3. This will help make the plant more manageable and also serves to get rid of any old bits that are better left discarded. A key thing to remember, which I myself have forgotten more than once, is to prepare the new location for your division or transplant before digging it out of the ground. Save yourself the scramble and make sure you know exactly where you're putting things. When you're ready to dig, get as close to the base of the plant as you can without chopping into the roots. Most plants that are divisible are pretty forgiving, but it's still the nice thing to do. Dig around the perimeter of the plant and know that you'll likely end up digging up the whole thing, and that's okay. Once the plant is out of the ground, work around it with a shovel to help loosen it up a bit and break the plant into sections. It'll take a little bit of work, but the plant will give with some coaxing. Once you have the piece or pieces you want to move, go ahead and pop the remaining plant back into its original hole, filling gaps with soil and compost and making sure the plant is firmly back in the ground. Now would also be a good time to give it some water, as it's probably a little shocked from the experience. Bring the transplant to its new home, making sure to fit it snugly in place. Just like with the other half, fill things in with garden soil or compost, tamp the plant down, and give it a drink. While I'm at it, I'm also going to divide and transplant some of my alliums. These plants are doing great, and are starting to outgrow their current quarters. That means I have the perfect opportunity to extend my allium footprint in my garden. Digging them out is very similar to the irises, though the alliums, which are basically just ornamental onion plants, won't be as tough to break through as the iris's rhizomes. If you want, you can dig up the whole plant and spread it out a little bit in its original spot, but I find that they fill out just fine on their own. And now I have irises and allium around the mailbox as a perfect complement to my zinnias. I can't wait to see how they do. Another great tip for October to set next year's garden up for success is to make sure to feed your compost pile. Remember this garden bed desperately in need of clearing? Don't worry. You won't have to watch me break it down. The great thing about compost is that your garden already has all the ingredients needed, and you get to experience feeding this year's garden with last year's, a perfect cycle. To feed your compost, you'll need a good amount of both green and brown materials. For my money, there's no better green material than fresh lawn clippings. Just make sure to avoid mowing over any weeds that have gone to seed when you're collecting grass. And then we pile on the remnants of our fall cleanup, a great mixture of materials that are already breaking down even before they hit the pile. To give the mixture a good jumpstart, I like to fold in some of this year's compost, which will help activate the process by incorporating existing microbes to the heap. And of course, to get things really rolling, make sure your compost pile is nice and watered. Take care of the pile by coming out every few days to turn it and give it some more water, along with any new bits to add to the mix. Don't worry about tending to it once it gets too cold out. It'll slow down, but we'll definitely keep working. And next season, you'll be rewarded with a moist, earthy, nutrient-packed compost, the gardener's gold. And finally, the thing I think every gardener should be doing in October, planting garlic. This is the easiest thing to grow in a garden, and every gardener should be growing it. Here's how. Garlic bulbs can be ordered from your seed company of choice. We grew 4 varieties last year, and these bulbs we harvested in July are being used to grow next year's garlic. I find it easiest to lay some poles down to mark my rows ahead of planting, which keeps the bed nice and orderly. Break apart the bulbs into individual cloves, being careful not to remove the outer paper, and expose the clove itself, which can invite pests, rot, and disease. If you happen to accidentally expose a clove, or if you have some cloves that are too small to plant, just, eat them with tonight's dinner. Space your garlic out around 4 to 6 inches, with another 6 to 12 inches between rows. I tend to stagger the rows, which probably doesn't do anything other than look nice. When planting your garlic, it's as easy as putting each individual clove into the ground. How deeply you plant each clove depends on where you live. For me, further north in my 5B garden, I'm going to plant it about 3 to 4 inches deep, or about 7 to 10 centimeters. Luckily, my trowel has markings on it, so it eliminates the guesswork. Now when planting your garlic, you want to make sure they're facing the right way. Always remember, pointy side up, flat side down. When planting garlic cloves, I find it easiest to stick my trowel into the soil to the proper depth, wiggle open a hole, drop in the clove, and cover. It's really that simple. Now would also be a good time to mulch your garlic bed with wood chips, straw, leaves, or whatever your favorite mulch is. I cover mine with a couple of inches of rich, nutritious compost. And then, of course, like any responsible gardener, give them a drink. And that's it. Your garlic is planted. It's as easy as that, and I guarantee if you followed these steps, you're going to have delicious garlic come next summer. Thanks for hanging out with me today in my garden. Hopefully you're able to apply some of these things to your own garden this October. And now tell me, what is it that you do to set up your garden for next year? Feel free to drop a comment below.